irritating thing. But you know we're heading to an amazing monument built by the Seljuks. When they took Isfahan as their capital, it was in 1051. And they took this kind of sleepy regional city and turned it into their imperial capital. They began a massive urban rebuilding campaign in this medieval city. And the first great building they built was the Jami Masjid, the great communal or Friday mosque. They built this at the site of a pre-existing communal mosque. And so there are still elements of the old building which were incorporated into the new. But the mosque as we see it today is mostly Seljuk with a few later additions, and I'll show you what a few of those are and how you can identify them, but including most of the plan. So this would become their kind of city center of the capital. And the plan is based upon a hypa-style courtyard mosque, what you're probably very familiar with, very similar to mosques like Cordoba. I gave you a reading which gave you more information than you will ever need about this mosque, but I wanted you to have access to kind of the basic great source which historians go to about the mosque, which was a monograph on the monument by Oleg Grabar. And he spends a lot of time talking about the divisions of the periods of building at the mosque. And we're going to mostly focus on this great period, the Seljuk period. And I'll talk about a little of the later additions as well. So phase 4. I also see, if you're sitting here wondering if there's something wrong with your eyes or your bifocals, there seems to be a bifocal problem with the projectors. So one side is greatly magnified and it's cropping out information on the right. So you'll probably want to try to look at the left. And then if you want to see a detail of something, look at the right.
That's so clever. Well done.
It was planned that way. Okay, so I've given you here some of the hints of what makes this monument important, and undoubtedly you've talked about some of this with your students, but let's talk about it now in detail. So it has a rectangular inner court, and its great contribution, this Four-iwan plan, which you see here in this aerial photograph. You'll also notice that around it are all these kind of covered structures. These are colonnade halls, hypostyle halls, and in between we have vaulting. So you end up having this kind of very animated interior. You'll also notice that it's not clear where the building ends and where the rest of the city begins in this photograph, and that's something that is definitely part of this. It became kind of structurally integrated over time with the buildings around it. And the galleries continue in one direction into a marketplace that then was connected with the Safavid city center that was built around 1600 or so. So it's deeply integrated into the city. It's even hard to tell when you're in an outer building and when you're still kind of in the mosque. It is this large, kind of a large central arch that usually demarcates a doorway, or in this case, it demarcates the space before the mihrab, the niche, empty niche facing Mecca for prayer. But it can be just an entranceway. And what's interesting here in Central Asia, and this is the most famous early monument, is that it brings together first 3 and then 4 Iwans. So you have this is a defining part of the architecture. You don't see this at Cordoba. You don't see this at the other early Umayyad mosques. This is really a Central Asian Persianate contribution in how it's used. And we see it really crystallize here at Isfahan. And then it becomes a model for other mosques and other types of civic architecture as well in this kind of Eastern Islamic world. So many of you probably know the city and the site at Samarkand, the Registan, the great Uzbek city square with these huge, beautiful gateways around kind of a town square. You couldn't have the Registan without Isfahan. This is the precedent that sets in motion an architectural type that spreads throughout Iran, Central Asia, and then on, in many ways, on into India and other later examples of Islamic architecture.
Is that clear to me then where the worshiper would be? Not, I mean, I understand facing the direction of Mecca, but are they, and then if only, and I'm sure it is, only one points, the mihrab points to Mecca, then are the others used during prayer or not?
Great question. All right, if only one points to Mecca, is this confusing? How do you use the space? How do you enter it? So there are some things here that demarcate the direction of Mecca. The largest, widest Iwan with the minarets on either side. These are visual symbols that this is the most important. This is the southward facing Iwan. This is the one that points to Mecca. People may enter, and actually at this one, through more than one portal, which are also marked by Iwans, but this is the main one.
So are people in the courtyard itself? I mean, if it's you know, a great mosque, then that must have an overflow. So they're in the court and they're just facing that.
They can be in the court. There's also a room, a muscara, like at Cordoba, that's built behind this domed area in front of the mihrab. So you can come to an interior space, but definitely the overflow would be in the courtyard.
No, I'm confused with you. So I'm seeing all of these little bumps that tell me there's pillars inside, and I'm imagining people praying inside that space. They just sort of know that the mihrab is up there in the other building.
They know.
Well, they're in this space, or they might be in these spaces. So these are just entrances to get into a place you can pray. How do you know if you're here that Mecca's there? Is there something on?
There's a lot of, I think you would know if you were in this gallery that this is the direction once you're inside. And
Is there not a fountain or a pool? It seemed to me that I saw a picture of a pool.
there is. We'll see it in,
The court?
it is in the courtyard. It's just blocked by, in this photo because of the angle of the photo, so we'll see it. So when you enter, then there's a place where you can wash and clean yourself. And this is something, if you have Muslim friends, they will do this today. You wash yourself, you clean yourself, you wash your hands before you enter a mosque or before you pray. It's part of the personal purification because you're doing something now in honor of God. You don't want to, and it's also why you pray upon a carpet or a rug in a clean space. So you can see just how confusing the plan is of the space. And also you can imagine how colonnade halls got added over time and expanded the space. So here is, it's also, unfortunately, because it's trying to face the right direction, Mecca would be to the south. So it's flipped from the direction of the photo we just saw, which was taken from the south looking. But anyway, so you're facing the right direction here. Our view earlier was here, looking down. Here's this kind of floral medallion-shaped pool. There's oftentimes in these large mosques an external pulpit as well as the minbar inside, because the crowd might be so large in a Friday mosque that you need more than one imam. You need more than one person to recite the prayers of what's going on. I think that's demarcated there. A view of the exterior. So stucco and brick. Unlike other structures, which we will see, mosques, they're mostly stone, or the wonderful mud mosque at Jenne. The local architecture here uses a lot of brick. And so the foundations of this are brick, and then there'll be sometimes kind of walls that are filled with rubble. This is a very medieval type of architecture. So there's vaulting, but you'll see when we look at those pillars in the colonnade, they're incredibly thick. This isn't a high refinement. Remember, I would compare this to innovations in Romanesque architecture.
I understand we're in an arid region, but there's got to be rainfall sometime. So with this roof structure, what's the accommodation for water?
Well, I don't know. Looks like it pools, doesn't it? Wow, I think we need an architectural historian to answer to that. But there are people who can. Let me refer you actually to a great source while we're talking, because I didn't put it in the materials I sent you. But there's a website that's linked to a architectural archive of the Islamic world called ArcNet. ArcNet.org. So ARCHNET.org. And this links to the Aga Khan kind of archive for architecture of the Islamic world. A lot of the images I'm showing you today came off of their site. Articles, they archive a lot of research materials, and sometimes when you look up a site on their search function, it may not just have images. It may have plans. It may have a narrative to give you some basic history. So there's a wonderful write-up on this mosque on the ArcNet site. No. No, it's a great resource. So I want you to know about it. It might be a place you can find information or direct students on assignments, or find some of your images that are hard to find. And I know, like this image, a lot of what I have to show you here is from ArcNet. All right, so view out across the city. And we're actually looking down now to the Safavid center when Isfahan became a capital for the next time. Okay, so here's a view through that kind of north portal, Iwan, looking to the south. Here you see the pool. Here's the raised platform for an additional person to do the recitation to the crowd. And here's this Iwan. And look how big it is. It's beautifully decorated. View of the courtyard again. Another thing which is an innovation here is the gallery with these wonderful wide Persian or Central Asian style arches, very thick, and we have a second level to the gallery. This also will become a precedent which is replicated in later Islamic architecture, and you know it because you've seen it in buildings like the Taj Mahal. Think of the entrance to the Taj Mahal when we look at it tonight, and think of this. This is the model. And it's so large you really can't get a photo of the entire interior. The decoration is interesting because much of it dates to the Seljuk period. You have this variation of techniques. So a lot of the decoration is created by contrasting bare brick and glazed brick. So not all of it is mosaic, and a lot of the mosaic is from later renovations from the Safavid period. Here you can see that decoration. So massive interior dome that frames the space in front of the main mihrab. And these are just like the quarter ends, the square ends of the brick that have been glazed and set in to create these wonderful geometric patterns that are actually calligraphies. And I think you can kind of start to see it. If you connect the dots, you're looking at geometric, kind of abstracted calligraphic forms. And up here, in essentially a brick dome. Now, you probably recognize these kind of faceted, where they'll create like a vaulting form and then they'll cut away in angled facets. These are called Mukarnas. We see these also as a standard feature of Islamic architecture, and they're probably most famous in this course with the Alhambra, those beautiful, beautiful stucco ceilings. And what's great about these forms is the way they capture, just like a facet on a gemstone, they capture light. And if you read poetic descriptions, medieval descriptions of the Alhambra, they'll talk about how as the sun moves through the sky during the day, you know, there are windows at the top of those vaults. The light changes and the ceiling seems to move. They look like they spin, like the stars in the heaven above a pole star, which is the center. And we're going to see this kind of played with in some of the other imagery comes out of the Persian world. But you see it very early in its presentation here. The dome again. And notice this too, the very center of the dome, a kind of round medallion, kind of with this expanding pattern. Keep this in mind because this becomes central to Persian architecture and decoration as well, this kind of central medallion. And we'll talk about what that is. And then you enter into the interior, and there is a mascara, like as we said at Cordoba, a space before the niche. And in that space, there is an additional dome filled with Mukarnas and brick, but also glazed tile decoration. And then I wanted to show you this. This is no longer, I believe, this is no longer used as the main mihrab. This is called, and I didn't write the name of it, I apologize, the mihrab of Old Jaitu. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, it's kind of Turkic. And it actually dates to the Mongol period, to 1310. So during a period we'll talk about in a few minutes with another work of art. But it's an incredible decorative mihrab. And this work here is all carved into stucco. So you have this incredible intertwined Quranic calligraphy, verses, and then beautiful kind of arabesque and interlacing floral imagery, and an empty niche, and also an ornate minbar. So the mihrab, the minbar, an older part of the mosque, which is now not used as the primary mihrab, thanks to a later renovation.
Why is that empty inside of the mihrab? Why did they leave that bare?
I think that the idea is that you are praying to God directly. There is no image, there is no graven image. It's one of the most fundamental aspects of Islam. So, for example, the ideas may go back as far as the Muhammad himself. Two things probably help us understand the mihrab. And it may have classical origins as well, the idea of a niched form, but it's left empty. So one of those is when Muhammad had his house in Medina, it said that there was a spot on the wall that he marked for people to face because that was the direction of prayer. Then when they go back to Mecca around 630, and he comes to Mecca with his armies, and they enter Mecca. His armies go to the Kaaba, and they remove all of the images because this was a shrine believed to be a shrine associated with the site where Abraham was, and it had been filled with the icons of the local Arab tribes. And they took all the icons out and destroyed them, everything, but there were some icons actually that depicted Mary. And those were kept, although I don't believe they were put back into the Kaaba, but because Mary is revered in the Islamic tradition. But the other idols, they destroyed, and the Kaaba is empty, and that's the point. This is a sacred vessel that represents this kind of miracle presence of God on earth. That's what you pray to. It's empty. So that kind of emptiness is critical. And I have Muslim friends who talk about this, or that they have a place in their house which they'll use for prayer. There are no photos, no TV, nothing on that wall. You keep it empty. Some of them will even take family pictures down or turn them down when it's time for prayer, to use the space for that. There's no presence of anything that could become a graven image. So it's like a niche for an image in another religious tradition, but it's left empty. Similar to Judaism as well, where just the holy book will be placed in a niche.
The stone from heaven, was that in the Kaaba before and then it was placed on the outside corner?
Yeah.
At that point, or was it already on the corner?
I think it was, I don't know if it was in the corner or inside. But that's a really interesting issue because you're bringing up something here of a tradition that is strictly aniconic, but here's a sacred object. And it's revered, but they would never call it an icon. Yes, touched. I mean, it's one of the great goals when you go and you circumambulate to try to get to touch that glass window. But I think they would be very, I think religious scholars would be very clear that this is a sacred object, but it's not being revered like an icon.
Was it inside there? Do you know if it was one of those things that was inside and they brought it out?
You know, I'm not sure. I'd probably have to check, but I believe it was. I believe it was kept in that shrine. It was that was one of the very important markers of that shrine. And it was brought to the most sacred shrine, the shrine that marked the miraculous place where Abraham was and got water in Arabia.
I'm not sure. When you asked that question, I think we've seen lots of mihrabs that have gorgeous decoration all the way down.
Mm-hmm.
This one stops right there and then goes blank concrete.
But when you look at this, when I look at this, I wonder, I mean, it won't have a figure, an object, but I wonder if this is restoration underneath.
Okay.
Because, and maybe that's your question. I went on a very long divergent tangent. But I do think that when I look at it, it seems quite different in its treatment, even if it was meant to be blank.
Is this still at the Great Mosque, or has this one been moved?
This is still there. And so it's one of these older elements in the complex. And you can see this really vigorous undercutting where you get, cut very deeply under here so the light forms shadows, makes the text quite clear to read. a very kind of magnificent work of relief carving. The minarets on either side of the south-facing Iwan with glazed tile decoration.
Why are the hands on top?
Ah, good question.
Why the hand on top?
I wonder. Well, that's one of those things. I'd have to be sure. I'm being filmed. You might cut this. If I'm wrong, I'll look it up later. I wonder if it's the hand of Fatima, so the daughter of the prophet. This is a common icon. It's sometimes you see these, and the hand becomes an object that is carried on religious processions, and perhaps even associated with regalia or objects that are offered to shrines. And it's a hand. So I wonder if it's the hand of Fatima. And if I'm wrong, I'm going to make him delete it before it gets put on the web. But it's my guess. And I've never noticed that. So you guys are really, really sharp. So now we have the North Iwan. And there's a bit of a story about these two. The north, you can see, is very tall, and even in these kind of projection aspect ratios, maybe you can see that it's kind of taller than it is wide, unlike the southern Iwan. Kind of more compact decoration, lots of that geometric glazed brick decoration. Very full Mukarnas that extends all the way to the back of the niche. It doesn't have this same kind of centralized dome because its function wasn't to serve overtop the prayer niche. And probably it might be interesting to talk a little bit about the history of these two. They were close in date, but they are quite different. So the southern dome, the southern Iwan is associated with the vizier, so kind of prime minister, great servant named Nizam al-Mulk, who served a ruler, Abu al-Fat Malik Shah, one of the Seljuk rulers. We know the name of the architect. This is inscribed, and there are inscriptions on this southern Iwan in front of the mihrab that name both the vizier, Nizam al-Mulk, and the Shah who he served. So a little bit later in date, just a couple decades, the North Iwan, was commissioned by a man named Taj al-Mulk. He was Nizam's successor. And he was actually the advisor to the Shah's mother. And it's believed that perhaps there was a little bit of effort in one-upsmanship going on, that this is a direct response to this, and that this was intended to be an upgrade. So let's talk about that for a minute, what you're looking at, and what you see as maybe a change and alteration. Why might someone think one is more successful than the other? It really does. So it has this element of height. It seems to let in a lot of light, so you have a lot more dramatic patterning going on. And there's something going on with balance. So I'm just going to read you. Art historians often make this comparison. And the common view among art historians is that the later northern dome is the epitome of mathematical perfection. There's more of harmony in its balance of horizontal and vertical forms. It's not kind of squat and flat and kind of cut out, maybe a little bit out of proportion in the first one, the southern Iwan. And architectural historians argue that this follows the golden mean of proportion, and this one doesn't. And so when we look at it, this kind of makes sense to us. This one seems a little heavy, a little off balance. And this is what a lot of art historians teach in their college level art history classes. They put these two up in front of the students and they have them argue, which one do you like better and why? Make an argument for it. So if you haven't lost your kids on this monument, because there's a lot of dense information, there's a lot going on, but it could be a fun one for them, or an assignment to write about and bring back. Okay. Let's go back through. And then these are those galleries. And do you see what I mean about the big fat piers holding up these vaults? Solid brick, very heavy, very Romanesque-like. There are areas where it's pierced with natural light. I don't think it's every gallery, every vault, but some of them do have natural light. And that's something that actually descriptions will talk about, that there's this real play of light and dark on the interior, and there is light.
On a clear day, all of the space filled with people praying.
It could be as you move backwards. There's a great benefit, as you know, too. If you live somewhere where there's a hot climate, it can be awfully nice to be in the colonnade, in the out of the protection of the sun. Well, I don't know, I haven't been there, but I would guess that you're not as tall as that division in the piers. So they're pretty large vaults, several stories in height. Okay, so let's get to our questions. What is it? We know. Why is it important? What works could it relate to? And what could you compare it with? Does anyone want to take a stab at any of these questions?
Okay, so the importance, as a beginning for the Persian themes that you see in many later architecture elements in Islam, with Iwans, that Four-iwan's idea, the Mukarna, is that how you say that?
Mukarnas, yeah.
Good. Those things that you see there that then are echoed in other ones. So as a precedent for Islamic architecture, this one seems pretty important as like setting precedent. So when I think I always like to think, why is this part of the 250? And for me, I think that's the number one thing I can get.
You're right. I probably might edit this. So we talked about, I remember the teams who were working on the list, and everybody was like, well, what about Samarkand? But they talked with a lot of Islamic art historians, and they said, you can't have Samarkand without this. This is the precedent. It doesn't make sense to teach. You can teach them both, but if you're only teaching one, you teach the root, the one that gave birth to these traditions. The Registan in Samarkand. Wonderful monument. And it has religious architecture associated with it. It has mosque and madrasa, but it's not. It's a great civic square, but based upon this plan. Okay, that's a great reason, that Four-iwan plan. And your kid, drill them, they should know that. And then talk about how it expresses the elements of a mosque. So what would you compare it to? What is its closest relationship in the list of 250? Cordoba. Great. Anything else?
Well, the Ivan and then the arcades reminded me of the Taj Mahal.
Yeah, you could say Taj Mahal. You had one.
Well, and I'm thinking actually, if it's different, that this mosque is different than almost all of the mosques in Chennai, and like that, when we should not necessarily talking about like architecturally, that's completely different, and yet there's
And then what could it be compared to aside from these other Islamic structures? Anything you might compare it to? For any reason. Doesn't have to be because it's a Islamic or something like that. This is the center of a new dynastic capital. And so that political importance of this mosque is great. And when the Safavids come, some of the really detailed mosaic work you saw is later. There are renovations during the Safavid period when this becomes a capital again under Shah Abbas, so right around 1600. What's interesting is they add inscriptions. The Shahs add inscriptions, the Safavids over time. And they also, both Quranic, and putting their name on it, and they also list the name of Ali and the Shia imams who followed, the followers of Shiism, because the Safavids were a Shia dynasty. So they kind of transformed it sectarian-wise during their rule. But this also wasn't their main mosque. They built a new city center and a new Shah mosque for themselves, but they helped create roads and a market and connected through a marketplace to connect them to the old center. So it's a very interesting city and very interesting way the monuments are connected.